Morning, all. All right, so I'm not wearing a jersey. I'm wearing a Christmas themed Disneyland. They call them Spirit jerseys because that's the company that makes them. Anyway, so technically, I'm still wearing a jersey, kind of, sort of. But anytime I call it that, people are like, that's not a jersey. But when I call them those jerseys, people are like, that's a sweater, not. And we've been through that. So today's American Thanksgiving. That ramble was free. And I've got the Eastern standings, the Western standings here because it's a discussion that's going to be seen a lot of places today, and I figure I might as well weigh in. Now, what I've got on the board is teams arranged by the standings straight from the NHL website, and I've got their points totals and points percentages because if you just get into the straight standings, there's going to be a lot of, well, actually, in the comments. But the thing is, it's interesting to note that there's more well actuallys, it feels like, in the West maybe than there is in the East, in that I think the playoff picture's a little bit clearer in the East than in the West, but we can go through it. So starting things off in the East, Toronto Maple Leafs, 28 points, 636 points percentage, leading the Atlantic. And considering how many injuries they have, and they're suffering more injuries last night, that forward group has just been torn to pieces, and yet they still have a 636 points percentage. So the Toronto Maple Leafs have done well for themselves. We know that nobody's going to take them seriously until they start winning in the playoffs. And so that's where it gets tough. We've had that discussion now for years. Until Toronto wins in the playoffs, there will always be the naysayers, and it doesn't matter if they win their division, those naysayers are still going to be out there. Florida's second in the division with 27 points and a 587 points percentage. Florida's, I mean, like they win last night. I don't think their slump is worrying at all. I think that this is a Florida team that's played a lot of hockey over the last 12 calendar months, and at times that's going to wear on you. So the Florida Panthers, still a contending team, could very well win another Stanley Cup. That could happen. Boston has the number three spot right now in the Atlantic, 25 points, 521 points percentage, and it should be fascinating to see how the fight for that third spot in the division goes because I don't think Boston necessarily stays in third, and we'll go through it, but there's definitely going to be a fight in the East when it comes to that final playoff spot. So I'll leave Boston for a moment. We'll come back to them. Carolina leading their division, 33 points in the Metro, 750 points percentage. Fantastic run by Carolina. Easily the best team, I think, in the East right now. And if they're down, they're going to win. If they're winning, they're going to win. If it's tied, they're going to win. There's kind of a theme with Carolina games right now. New Jersey, 32 points, 640 points percentage. So they've played a lot more. Well, I don't. A lot more is overstating it, but they've played more games than have Carolina or a lot of the other teams that they're fighting for playoff spots with as well. So they don't have control over their own destiny, but it's still very early in the season. And I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, New Jersey being number two in the division, 9 points above or 8 points above the 9 points. I was right above the playoff line. That's got to be considered a win, right? So New Jersey's in a really good spot. I do view them as a contender. We'll see what happens come playoff time with them as well. The Washington Capitals, 31 points, 705 points percentage. So in terms of points percentages, they're ahead of New Jersey. The Capitals being able to stay on the winning track without Ovechkin. It was tough the first couple of games, but they're figuring it out. Last night's game against Tampa being a good example of how they're figuring things out. But yeah, the Capitals at a 705 points percentage. That's a huge surprise. It would also be a huge surprise if they fell off after American Thanksgiving because they've just been so good as a team. They're playing so well as a team, which is going to make them more dangerous come playoff time. The New York Rangers. So I talked about them a couple days ago in a video. They have 25 points, 595 points percentage. So one thing that stands out right away is that 595 points percentage. That would leave them second currently in the Atlantic. The 25 points would leave them in third place then. I don't know if there'd be as much talk about the Rangers and their struggles if they were in the Atlantic as opposed to the Metro, because there are three teams in the Metro with very, very good records, and it leaves the Rangers in a more vulnerable spot. Speaking of a vulnerable spot, the Tampa Bay Lightning, 24 points. However, they have a 571 points percentage, so they've played fewer games than Boston. In all likelihood, Tampa Bay occupies that third spot, and maybe plays Florida in the first round, but could get Toronto as well. Either way, it would be a fun series, whether it was Toronto and Tampa or Florida and Tampa. But Tampa Bay doing all right without Stamkos, and considering how the team that got Stamkos has been doing to this point, and it's very, very early for us to make that decision on whether or not it was a good move. It certainly looks like they made the right decision to go get Jake Gensel and understand that that meant that they were going to lose Steven Stamkos. So for right now, this is your above the playoff line, and then we get into below the playoff line in the East. And you got Buffalo, 23 points, 523 points percentage. I think Buffalo's playing pretty well. Their points percentage is a little bit better than Boston's. And I kind of think that Buffalo's headed in the right direction. Last night's game against Minnesota, they lose that game. They get shut out. But it was close. Luukkonen keeps it close. They had opportunities. Gustafsson was fantastic. Sometimes you just get goalied. So Buffalo, I think, is doing all right for themselves. They've won, 7 of their last 11? Maybe they end up above the line, which makes it more difficult for the teams below Buffalo. Because if we're going to look and say, all right, let's say Boston's the one team that we can look at and go, they could be susceptible to maybe falling out of the playoff race, or at the very least falling below that playoff line. I don't think Tampa does. And even though the Rangers are having their struggles, I still think they end up above the playoff line, which means that there'd just be that one spot if we say that Boston's the vulnerable team. And so if Buffalo is in a position where they might be the one to get it, it's more difficult for the Philadelphia Flyers, 23 points, 500 record. Detroit, 22 points and a 500 record. Columbus, 21 points and a 500 record. These three teams are all clumped together, and it's interesting because they're all in a different situation. The Flyers are still in a rebuild. Detroit's supposed to be coming out of their rebuild. This is supposed to be the year where the Yzer plan means playoff games. And Columbus, dealing with everything they dealt with in the offseason and all of the uncertainty about the team right up until the season started and how they were going to approach it, I think Columbus has done really well. I do. I think being 500 at this point, Columbus has done really well. If they can add a couple of players, maybe Columbus makes a run. So of the three teams, I might be the most confident in Columbus, maybe surprisingly coming out of nowhere to secure a spot in the top 8 in the East. Ottawa, 21 points, 477 points percentage. They get a win last night on 11 shots, which was both baffling and impressive at the same time. But Ottawa seems to find a way to not make the playoffs. And so it's going to be very difficult for them because, as you can see, they have to pass how many teams to make the playoffs? It's a lot. And so you're not only facing the fact you're 3 points out, just how many teams are ahead of you also starts to become daunting. The Islanders, 21 points, 457 points percentage. They haven't looked like a playoff team this season. Sorokin's kept them in a lot of games. Their structure and the way they play keeps games close in most cases. But, yeah, Patrick Roy is a good coach. There's only so much that he can do. The Pittsburgh Penguins, 20 points, 417 points percentage. They get a win last night over Vancouver, but it's the same as I mentioned about Ottawa. You're only 4 points back of a playoff spot, but look at how many teams you have to pass to get there. It becomes quite the task to be able to do so. And then Montreal's at the bottom with 19 points, 432 points percentage. So there's only 5 points between the playoff line and the team at the bottom of the East. So competitive in the East, but Montreal at the bottom, not a huge surprise. Points percentage-wise, they're ahead of Pittsburgh. I don't know if they're ahead of Pittsburgh at the end of the season, but there's an article I saw today on the downfall of the Penguins and everything, which we have documented and talked about already in this channel. Montreal is, of course, rebuilding. This isn't really a surprise. So of the teams two below the playoff line, I could see Detroit making a change behind the bench. I can't see that with Buffalo. I can't see that with Philly. Columbus, no, they just got a new coach. Ottawa, I know there's some that aren't sold on Travis Green, but he was just hired not that long ago. Patrick Roy, obviously, hired not that long ago. Pittsburgh, it will be interesting to see if, as this season plays out, if Mike Sullivan ends up being the scapegoat for what's going on. And, of course, with Montreal, you got Marty St. Louis. I don't know. I don't know if they're going to keep him around the whole season and into next year or what happens, but I wouldn't really blame Marty St. Louis for the struggles of the Montreal Canadiens, to be honest. So, that is the Eastern Conference. So I might as well add a timestamp for for like a chapter for East and West, so people can skip to the West if they want to. And now let's talk about the West. The Winnipeg Jets, 36 points for them, 783 points percentage. I think what we've seen on this road trip is they're human. They're not superhuman. They're not like miles ahead of everybody else in the league, but they're a pretty darn good team. And will they end up finishing first? We shall see. They have a pretty good cushion in terms of being 1-2 in the division, but we're still early in the season. One thing that at this point in time, the standings will usually tell you who's going to make the playoffs and who isn't. It doesn't necessarily tell you the order. So Winnipeg, I don't expect them to continue winning like 18 out of every 23 games. Minnesota as well. I do expect their points percentage probably dials back a bit. They have 32 points, 727 points percentage. So when we look at points percentages in the NHL, Winnipeg's number 1 at 783. Number 2 is Carolina at 750. And Minnesota's right there at number 3 at 727. So Minnesota's playing very, very well. No argument against them here. And they're ahead of Dallas. Dallas, 26 points, 619 points percentage. Dallas has been underwhelming, to be honest. Just on the whole, it has not been the kind of season that I thought it was going to be necessarily. And so for Dallas, there's plenty of time for them to figure it out. They're still a playoff team for sure, but are they a contender? That's what we're going to find out as the season goes along. There's definitely some slumping players, goal scoring wise. Jason Robertson comes to mind right away. Wyatt Johnston comes to mind right away. There's some guys who can get it going, and they have a 619 points percentage while they're not going. So Dallas is still a dangerous team for the fact that they have a very solid record, while some guys are not off to great starts. Vegas leading the Pacific Division, 674 points percentage, 31 points. And Vegas does Vegas things. They manage to get points in games where if you're watching, you're like, I don't know how they got a point there. I don't know how that happened. I don't understand, but they do it. Calgary, 28 points, 609 points percentage for Calgary. And we keep waiting for the Flames to fall off, but think about it. They have a 609 points percentage. That's ahead of the Rangers. That's ahead of Florida. That is ahead of, who else here? We've got Colorado they're ahead of. I'm just trying to think of teams we wouldn't have expected to be ahead of, like almost everybody. The Flames are supposed to be rebuilding. This is very unexpected. Then you've got the LA Kings, 27 points, 587 points percentage. And the Kings are kind of mucking things up a little bit by still being good enough to be a playoff team. It means that we're going to have a pretty good team miss the playoffs in the West. Colorado, 26 points, 565 points percentage. We have documented all of the injuries with Colorado plenty, and they're still rolling along. One thing I'd also mention with the Kings is this is a team that I would say has a 587 points percentage. Looks like they probably make the playoffs, and there's definitely some uncertainty in net with them. It's definitely a topic I want to cover either today or sometime soon on just how many teams in the NHL you're not 100% on their goaltending. It feels like it's really high right now. And I don't think it's mediocre goaltending. I think it's just maybe it's over analysis, or maybe it's just the fact that goaltenders are not deployed like they used to be. You don't have goaltenders who play 60 plus games. So at any rate, Colorado 565 points percentage, just behind Dallas, of course, in terms of points. They both have 26, but points percentage would keep Colorado down here. Vancouver 25 points, 595 points percentage. So Vancouver in points percentage is ahead of the LA Kings. And if they did jump ahead of the LA Kings and get to play the Flames in the first round of the playoffs, that'd be a throwback. That's a fight that I really, really enjoy seeing in the playoffs, is Calgary-Vancouver. And that's even though Calgary normally will win that series. It just happens to be that in 1982 and 1994, Vancouver knocked out Calgary and then went all the way to the final. So it was one of the reasons why I remember those series fondly. There are definitely plenty of other times that Calgary has knocked out Vancouver. But, yeah, it'd be fun to see that battle rejoined. But the Kings are going to muck it up, aren't they? Below the playoff line reside the Edmonton Oilers. 24 points and a 545 points percentage. So the interesting thing with the Oilers is they're outside on points and points percentage. And there's definitely a discussion to be had about the Edmonton Oilers in that they've just, re-signed Draisaitl. He's sticking around forever. They want to do the same with McDavid, but there's some question marks on this team, and apparently McDavid and Draisaitl together are not, necessarily going to be enough to get the Oilers above the line. I still think the Oilers make it. The expectation will be that either the Kings or the Flames drop out. The Canucks do have to watch that their road record continues to be remarkable because their home record has not been. So it puts more pressure then on them on the road, at least a little bit there. And maybe the Oilers jump in past one of those three Pacific Division teams. I can't see any of the four Central Division teams falling off: Winnipeg, Minnesota, Dallas, or Colorado. I'd be very surprised if that happened. Seattle, 523 points. They're right there. Seattle has shown an ability this season at times to look really good, really effective, nice structure. At other times, not so much. Last night against Anaheim seemed to frustrate them because they seem to be getting on the right track at points, and then they'll fall back again. So Seattle just has to get a little more consistency in their game. St. Louis is a fascinating one too because they have 23 points, 479 points percentage, but they just changed their coach, and under the new coach, they're 2-0. And beating the Rangers and the Devils tells you maybe there's something here in St. Louis, and maybe St. Louis can be that spanner in the works and end up knocking out one of the teams that we expect to make it in the West. So one thing that works against St. Louis is being in the Central. It's unlikely they're going to catch any of the four Central Division teams. Although they're only 3 points back, they've obviously played more games in that they have a 479 points percentage. The Anaheim Ducks, 21 points, 500 points percentage. There's no pressure on the Ducks to make the playoffs. I thought they looked kind of relaxed, and they played well last night, honestly, against Seattle. So they're going to be kind of fun to watch. Utah, 21 points, 477 points percentage for Utah. It is the first year for them in Utah. I was going to say in the desert, but I'm like, no, they left the desert to live, to reside in the desert. So at any rate, Utah has had their ups and downs. It's unlikely that they end up going on a run and making the playoffs. San Jose, 19 points, 380 points percentage. I think the Sharks fans probably happy to see them not at the bottom. But their 380 points percentage is the worst points percentage in the league. It is deceptive because I do think San Jose is playing much better than they did last year. As last night, for an example, I think they dominated large stretches of that game against Ottawa. They're playing well. Their results just don't necessarily show it. So the San Jose Sharks are trending in the right direction. Chicago, 18 points, 409 points percentage. So one thing that's interesting is the three worst points percentages are in the West again, but the teams have changed. So you still have San Jose, you still have Chicago. Expectations were not high for either of them. But Nashville, 391 points percentage and 18 points. It is still a bit of a surprise to me that Nashville, not necessarily that they're below the playoff line, but that they're this bad. I think that's the part that's really kind of thrown me off is that they do have a 391 points percentage. Chicago is ahead of them both in points and points percentage. And as much as people are disappointed with Pittsburgh, still ahead of Nashville. The only one below Nashville in points percentage is San Jose. I don't think that continues. I'd be very surprised if that continued. So looking at the playoffs, if they started today, and again, this is just kind of for fun. In the East, we'd have Carolina and Tampa Bay. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that'd be high scoring and probably a pretty emotional series between the two. Toronto and the Rangers, please and thank you. Toronto against the New York Rangers would be so insanely entertaining, unpredictable, and bonkers. And it would be a matchup between two teams that would be desperate not to lose in the first round. There could be some punches thrown there too. Florida and Boston. As a Boston fan, can I just opt out? Like, if that ends up being a playoffs, I just want to opt out. I just, no thank you. And I know there'll be some Bruins fans going, hey, we could get revenge. Yeah, it's not likely. It's not likely. New Jersey against Washington. That would be a lot of fun to watch too. They play differing styles of hockey. They're definitely familiar with one another, and that could be kind of a fun little battle because you have a team in Washington that wasn't expected to be in the playoffs, a team in New Jersey that missed the playoffs last year. Whichever team loses in the first round is going to have some questions about their future. So, yeah, it would be interesting to see. And I say that because if with New Jersey, if we're 3 years, well, I mean, they made the playoffs, missed the playoffs, and have to make the playoffs and lose in the first round. There's definitely going to be discussion about whether or not they're built for the playoffs. Then we go out west. Winnipeg, not for me. Not for me. I generally don't do those things. I don't call teams soft and all this because plenty of teams in the past have been called soft that end up winning a Stanley Cup, and they'd be like, oh yeah, no, they learned how to get tougher. Okay, so Winnipeg and Vancouver would be a matchup in the West. Um, that would be a fun series. That'd be a lot of fun. And I know people are going to ask, well, how would that go with you and your wife? We get along fine when teams we root for are against one another. Vegas and Colorado, that'd be quite the battle. That'd be a bit of a surprise to see Colorado in a wild card spot if that was how things shook down once we get to the playoffs. But Vegas and Colorado would be an amazing series in that whoever loses in the first round would be kind of a surprise first round exit. Minnesota and Dallas. Yes, please. So what's interesting with this is with how the playoffs are right now. Dallas and Vancouver, of course, two teams I root for in the West, and Minnesota and Winnipeg being two teams that my wife roots for. So right there, that would be very entertaining. I honestly that would be very entertaining to have Minnesota, Dallas, Winnipeg, Vancouver in the same year, and then Calgary and LA, and that's a throwback. I remember some classic series between the Flames and the Canucks. Flames and the Canucks definitely, but Flames and the Kings. So yeah, if we had the playoffs right now, and since there's no way to hold my feet to the fire on this, I think Carolina would beat Tampa. I actually like Toronto over the Rangers with how they're playing right now. Florida against Boston. Florida wins that. And New Jersey, Washington. I kind of like the Capitals. So that would leave us with Carolina and Washington. I like the Canes in that one. And then you'd have Toronto against Florida. Sorry, Toronto. It's Florida. So then that'd be Florida and Carolina. Man, I'm sending Florida back to the Stanley Cup. Who would they be against? Well, you have Winnipeg, Vancouver. Winnipeg wins that series, I think. Vegas and Colorado. I think Vegas finds a way to win that. Minnesota, Dallas. I kind of like Dallas. Minnesota in the playoffs has had their struggles over the years. Calgary and LA. I think LA would win that series, which would leave us with Winnipeg and Dallas. Oh, man. Probably Dallas in a playoff series. I just looking at recent seasons, I think probably Dallas. And then Vegas and LA. Yeah, Vegas. I think Vegas would win that series. You'd have Vegas and Dallas in the conference final. Man, I'd have Florida and Vegas. Yeah, yeah, Florida and Vegas, and then if that was the Stanley Cup final, uh, that's tough because you have the 2023 champs against the 2024 champs, and they met each other in the 2023 final. I'll say Florida gets revenge for 2023, and they win back to back. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. This doesn't mean I've changed my Stanley Cup pick. My Stanley Cup pick at the start of the year was Dallas. I'm sticking with Dallas. Just going through the matchups as they are right now, that's my call, but we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.